my view, they're proceeding in a very positive way. Of course, from the Israeli side, there's always been a desire to move very fast, but the pace of the restoration of relations is dictated more by Moroccan political considerations. And overall, I think it's fair to say that the relationship has developed in a very nice way. We've seen now the high-level visits of the Israeli officials, including Israel's foreign minister, meeting with his Moroccan counterparts in Morocco and opening up the diplomatic office and signing of a number of agreements. The establishment of direct flights. These are important in and of themselves, and they are important because they are in public. And that's what I think is significant here. We know that Israel and Morocco have maintained relations, even important relations, but they've been mostly out of the eye of the public. And the fact that these are that what is happening now is in public is significant. It sends a message to everyone, to their publics, to the critics, to the world, that the two countries understand the importance of the relationship and of the importance of developing the relationship and consolidating it and expanding it. And thus, I would say that overall, the relationship is in a very, that the process has been a very positive one. The most obvious and immediate potential for cooperation has been in the area of tourism. And this is why Israel, for so many years, was hoping to be able to establish direct flights to Morocco, which would mean that the Israeli tourists who come to Morocco, have been coming to Morocco for many years, would be able to cut their journey time in half, from, let's say, 8 or 9 hours to 5 hours, because you don't have to change planes. And this is clearly will be an incentive for more people to come, for more people to make this trip. Now, the problem, of course, right now is the pandemic and COVID. So obviously this is not the time to travel for all kinds of reasons and with all the difficulties. And so we're going to have to wait until the situation with regard to the pandemic improves before we see a real a leap forward in the number of Israeli tourists who are coming to Morocco. In addition to that, of course, the direct flights will make it possible to deepen the ties between business people, between families, and of course there are many areas in which Israel and Morocco can cooperate and need to cooperate. We have common interests in the areas of coping with climate change, desert agriculture, conserving and developing water resources, solar energy. These are all common subjects, issues on the two countries' agendas, and there's tremendous room for growth in that regard. The deepening cultural ties, I think it's fair to say that there are many people on both sides in civil society who want to deepen and strengthen the historical relationship between Morocco and its Jewish community and its diaspora, and its the Moroccan Israeli community. And this is of course enshrined in the Moroccan Constitution, these historic ties. And there is I think a lot of hope and the civil society success in the civil society sectors and potential for exchanges, for cultural exchanges. This will be very good for promoting mutual understanding. And besides that, of course, there are the well-known security and geopolitical issues, and overall Israel and Morocco stand on the same side on a whole host of issues dealing with security and geopolitical challenges, dealing with terrorism, dealing with radical movements, with extremism, etc. And there are differences, particularly on the Palestinian issue. And here we can say that the dialogue that exists between the countries now is important in being able to get each other's views across, and to manage the differences when there are crises. And I know Morocco would like to, has played a role as a facilitator in promoting Arab-Israeli diplomacy and diplomatic measures to promote peace. And as far as I'm concerned, certainly there is room. I think Israel will pay more attention to Morocco, and now that Morocco's position, because Morocco has become more open about its relationship with Israel. Look, this is, I think, a very transparent and not very credible attempt by the Algerian regime to pass the blame for its own difficulties onto foreign elements. And this is a common strategy that governments in trouble blame the external actors. Algeria, as you know, the regime is struggling to reestablish its legitimacy after the enormous impact of the Iraq citizens movement in 2019, which brought about which forced the resignation of the long-standing president Bouteflika. But the regime is still in place, and this regime still does not have the legitimacy it would like to have. We see the very low turnout in the elections that it had. We know the enormous alienation, the hogre that people feel that the regime projects towards them, the contempt that the authoritarian pouvoir shows towards the public, and this has been compounded by the major economic difficulties that Algeria has. Its historic budget deficit, its need to curb spending, the low carbohydrate prices, the impact of the pandemic, and the loss of 1 million jobs due to the pandemic, the weakening of the Algerian dinar, the severe decline in its foreign exchange reserves, which make it impossible to buy off the population to maintain the authoritarian bargain that existed for many years, that thanks to the high prices, and the unrest in Kabylia, and the forest fires, the latest, the worldwide fires that took place in Morocco, they take place in Algeria, and America, and Israel. But to blame foreign elements for these fires, and to blame the separatist movement, which is really not a big movement in terms of its capacity to do anything, but I think the Kabylians are alienated, and the regime would like to point the finger at the Kabylian separatist movement to try to blame again, to cast the blame, to shift the blame for their own shortcomings onto the so-called separatists and the Israelis and the Moroccans, to create this sort of big conspiracy theory to account for why Algeria is having its difficulties. And so I think this is what's behind the Algerian accusations. It seems pretty transparent to me that this is a way to shift the blame for its own economic difficulties. And of course, Algeria is not happy with the strengthening of Moroccan-Israeli ties, and they certainly weren't happy when the U.S. government helped broker this, quid pro quo of unilaterally recognizing Morocco's sovereignty over the Western Sahara in return for Morocco's agreement to restore official relations with Israel. This was a slap in the face of the Algerians because, of course, as you know, Algeria supports the Polisario movement and advocates self-determination. And this is, again, part of Algeria's problem. They are working from a weakened position in the region and internationally as well. So I think that's what all those factors together explain why Algeria is being so militant and why they cut relations with Morocco over them in recent days. Algeria is in a weaker position regionally. Iran is lined up in a very serious political and geostrategic conflict with Israel, and Israel is aligned with the majority of the Sunni Arab states against it, the Gulf states. Morocco is part of this sort of Gulf, pro-Western monarchies club in the Gulf, and so in that regard, there's Algeria and Iran, which you could say have common interests against the monarchies club and against Israel against Israel because it is aligned. It is aligned with that club. I think Iran wants to play the Israel card in order to maybe win some support of the Arab street, because much of the public in the Arab world is still hostile to Israel. So I think Iran wants to win points in that regard. But Algeria is far away from Iran, and there's not really much that Iran can do for Algeria, I think, in that regard. I don't think it can really provide significant support for the Polisario. I don't see there's much future in the Polisario will have a real military option in this regard, and they're also playing a weak hand. I'm doubtful that Algeria would want to initiate a military confrontation with Morocco and over the Sahara. What is Israel looking for? Israel, it's normal for countries who are outside of particular regional groupings to have observer status in those groupings, whether it's the Arab League or the Organization of American States or the African Union or the European Union, or et cetera. It's normal for countries to have observer status. Israel had observer status in the Organization of African Unity, which was the predecessor for the AU. The AU was established in 2002 to replace and to upgrade the functioning of the OAU. And so Israel, up until 2002, had observer status in the OAU. There are many other countries that have observer status, like the UK, the Mexico, Kuwait, Greece, the United Arab Emirates, and also the Palestinian Authority, or the State of Palestine, as they see themselves, have status in the AU. And so it would be completely normal for Israel to also have similar status. Israel has relations with many African states. There are all kinds of levels of cooperation and with African states. Africa has always been a sphere in which Israel develops ties, economic ties, political ties, etc. This is normal in the area of international relations, and there's no reason in the world why the African Union should not grant observer status to Israel.